Picture this. You're 38 years old, standing in your own kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at a stack of overdue bills while your phone buzzes with yet another crisis text from someone who needs you to fix their life. The sink is full of dishes from dinner you made for your ungrateful teenage daughter. There's a load of laundry waiting that belongs to your 22-year-old son who moved back home for the third time. And somewhere in the living room, your husband is passed out on the couch again, surrounded by empty beer cans and the glow of whatever sports game he decided was more important than helping with literally anything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That was my Tuesday. That was also my Wednesday, Thursday, and pretty much every other day for the past 15 years. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I used to be the person everyone called when their world was falling apart. I was the mom who never said no, the wife who always said yes, the daughter who dropped everything when family needed something, and the friend who gave and gave until there was nothing left of me to give. But this story isn't about that version of me. This story is about what happened when I finally realized that being everyone's hero was slowly killing the person I used to be. The morning that changed everything started like any other morning in my cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Tampa. My alarm went off at 5:30, which gave me exactly 90 minutes to shower, make breakfast for 4 people, pack lunches, do a load of laundry, and somehow make myself presentable enough for my job as a dental hygienist at Dr. Patterson's office downtown. The routine was so automatic I could probably do it with my eyes closed, which was good because most mornings I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life anyway. I stumbled to the kitchen and immediately stepped on something sticky. Maple syrup, apparently, because my daughter Emma had made herself pancakes the night before and decided that cleaning up was optional. The breakfast dishes were still scattered across the counter, along with the science project she'd abandoned halfway through and somehow expected me to finish. Again. As I started the coffee maker, my phone lit up with a text from my son Tyler. "Mom, can you send me $200? Rent's due and I'm short." No please, no explanation, just the assumption that I would handle it like I always did. This would be the 4th time in 6 months I'd covered his rent, money that came directly out of the grocery budget or the small savings account I'd been trying to build for the past decade. I was scraping syrup off the floor when my husband David shuffled into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes and reeking of stale beer. "Coffee ready?" he mumbled, not bothering to look at the mess around him or acknowledge that I'd been up cleaning his disaster from the night before. "Almost," I said, because that's what I always said. David had been out of work for 8 months, supposedly looking for something in construction, but most days he seemed to think job hunting meant scrolling through his phone and complaining about how employers these days didn't appreciate real workers. Meanwhile, my paychecks covered rent, utilities, groceries, and apparently everyone else's emergencies too. The coffee finished brewing and I poured him a cup, adding exactly 2 sugars the way he liked it. He took it without a thank you, just a grunt of acknowledgement before settling at the kitchen table with his phone. I started making breakfast, scrambling eggs and toasting bread while mentally calculating whether I had enough gas money to make it to work and back. That's when my phone rang. My mother's contact photo filled the screen, and I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach. Mom only called before 8 a.m. when something was wrong, and lately, something was always wrong. "Rebecca, honey, I hate to bother you so early," she started, which meant she absolutely didn't hate it at all. "But I'm having trouble with the electric bill again. They're threatening to shut it off, and you know I can't manage without air conditioning in this heat." I closed my eyes and counted to 3. Mom lived in a senior community in Clearwater, about 40 minutes away, and while her Social Security covered most of her expenses, she had a habit of spending money on things she didn't need and then acting surprised when the bills came due. Last month it was a new television. The month before, it was a weekend trip to visit her sister in Orlando. How much do you need, Mom? I asked, though I already knew it would be more than I had. Just $300 should cover it. I can pay you back next month when I get my check. $300 I didn't have, that she wouldn't pay back, for a problem she could have avoided if she'd just been more careful with her money. But saying no to Mom meant listening to lectures about family responsibility and guilt trips, about how she sacrificed everything to raise me. It was easier to say yes and figure out the money later. I'll transfer it this morning, I said, watching David scroll through Facebook while his eggs got cold. You're such a good daughter, Mom said, relief flooding her voice. I don't know what I'd do without you. I knew exactly what she'd do. She'd figure it out, just like everyone else managed to do before I came along to solve all their problems. But I didn't say that. I never said that. After hanging up, I did quick math in my head. Tyler's rent, Mom's electric bill, and our own. Bills meant I'd be dipping into the credit card again. The same credit card I'd been trying to pay off for 3 years, but every time I made progress, another emergency came up that somehow became my responsibility. Emma finally emerged from her bedroom, moving like she was walking through molasses, and wearing an expression that suggested being awake before noon was a personal attack on her human rights. She was 17, a senior in high school, and had perfected the art of being just helpless enough that other people would do things for her. "Where's my lunch?" she asked, standing in the middle of the kitchen like she expected it to materialize. "Good morning to you too," I said, pulling sandwich supplies from the refrigerator. "How did the science project go?" She shrugged, dropping into the chair across from David. "I couldn't figure out the graph part. Can you finish it tonight?" "It's due tomorrow." This was the third project this semester that had somehow become my responsibility. Emma was perfectly capable of doing her own work, but she'd learned that if she waited until the last minute and looked stressed enough, I'd step in and handle it, just like I handled everything else. "Emma, you need to do your own homework," I said, though we both knew I'd probably end up finishing the project anyway because I couldn't stand the thought of her failing. "But I don't understand it," she whined, using the same tone that had worked on me since she was 5 years old. "You're so much better at this stuff." I packed her lunch in silence. Turkey sandwich with no mayo because she'd decided last week that mayo was disgusting. Apple slices with a little lemon juice so they wouldn't turn brown, and a bag of the expensive chips she insisted on having. The lunch cost more than what I usually spent on my own meals all day, but Emma had very specific requirements about what she would and wouldn't eat. David finally looked up from his phone long enough to notice the tension in the room. "What's everyone so grumpy about?" he asked, as if he hadn't been sitting right there while I juggled 3 different crises before 7 a.m. "Nothing," I said automatically, because explaining would just lead to him getting defensive about not helping, and I didn't have the energy for that conversation again. I finished packing lunches, started another load of laundry, and was heading toward the shower when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Carmen in Phoenix. "Emergency. Can you call me?" My stomach dropped. Carmen was the responsible one in the family, the one who had her life together and rarely asked for help. If she was texting about an emergency, it was probably serious. I called her while walking to the bathroom, and she answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, thank God," she said, and I could hear she'd been crying. "It's Miguel. He lost his job yesterday, and we just found out the insurance is being canceled. Isabella needs surgery next month for her appendix, and without insurance." Isabella was Carmen's 8-year-old daughter, my niece who I adored, but only saw a few times a year, because plane tickets to Phoenix weren't exactly in the budget. The surgery wasn't optional, and I knew Carmen and Miguel were good people who worked hard, but lived paycheck to paycheck like most of us. "How much do you need?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer would be more than I had. "We don't want to ask for money," Carmen said quickly, "but I was wondering if you could co-sign for a medical loan, just as backup, you know. We'll make all the payments, but they want someone with better credit as a guarantor. Co-signing meant I'd be responsible if they couldn't pay, which meant another monthly payment I couldn't afford if something went wrong. But this was Isabella we were talking about, and she needed surgery. "Send me the paperwork," I said, sitting down on the edge of the bathtub. "I'll look it over." "You're a lifesaver, Rebecca. Literally. I don't know how we can ever repay you." After hanging up, I sat in the bathroom for a few extra minutes, staring at the cracked tile floor and wondering when my life had become an endless series of other people's emergencies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When had I become the person everyone called when they needed rescuing? And more importantly, when had I stopped being a person with my own dreams and goals and started being just a resource for everyone else to use? I took the fastest shower in history, threw on my scrubs, and grabbed my keys. The drive to work usually took 25 minutes, but today I hit every red light and got stuck behind a school bus that seemed to stop every 50 feet. By the time I pulled into the parking lot behind Dr. Patterson's office, I was already 10 minutes late. Dr. Patterson was waiting for me when I walked in, tapping his watch in that passive-aggressive way that made my skin crawl. He was a decent enough boss, but he had very specific ideas about punctuality and professionalism that didn't account for the fact that sometimes life happened before 8 a.m. "Rebecca, we've talked about this," he said before I'd even put my purse down. "The first appointment is at 8:15, and I need you here to set up." "I know, Dr. Patterson. I'm sorry. Family emergency this morning." He sighed like my family having emergencies was a personal inconvenience to him. "Look, I understand that things come up, but this is the third time this month you've been late. I need someone I can rely on." I nodded and apologized again, because what else could I do? I needed this job, and jobs with decent health insurance weren't exactly growing on trees. I'd been working here for 6 years, and while it wasn't my dream career, it paid enough to keep us afloat. Barely. The morning passed in a blur of routine cleanings and chatty patients who wanted to discuss their dental anxiety while I scraped plaque from their teeth. Mrs. Henderson talked about her grandson's baseball games. Mr. Foster complained about his neighbor's loud music, and teenage Ashley Martinez sat in sullen silence while her mother criticized everything from her posture to her choice of lip gloss. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and tried to eat a peanut butter sandwich while dealing with the financial crisis that had become my morning routine. I transferred $300 to Mom's account, which meant I'd have to put groceries on the credit card this week. I called Tyler and told him I'd send the rent money, even though it meant I'd be eating ramen for dinner more often than I cared to admit. And I started filling out Carmen's loan paperwork, calculating monthly payments that would stretch my budget even thinner. That's when I noticed the letter. It was wedged between my insurance cards and some old receipts in my wallet, a piece of mail I'd shoved in there weeks ago and forgotten about. The return address was from Henderson Community College, and for a moment I couldn't remember why they would be writing to me. Then it hit me. The nursing program. I'd requested information about their evening nursing program 6 months ago, back when I was feeling optimistic about maybe improving our situation. I'd filled out the inquiry form online during a particularly brutal day at work, imagining what it might be like to have a career that felt meaningful instead of just necessary. I opened the letter with hands that were suddenly shaking. Inside was an acceptance letter, dated 3 weeks ago, congratulating me on being accepted into their evening nursing program starting in January. They were holding a spot for me, but I needed to confirm enrollment and submit my deposit by the end of the week. I read the letter 3 times, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe I could build something better for myself. Nursing had always interested me, and the evening program meant I could keep working during the day while taking classes at night. It would be hard, but it would also be mine. Something I was doing for me, not because someone else needed me to. Do it. Then reality crashed back in. The deposit was $500, money I definitely didn't have after the morning's financial emergencies. The program would take 3 years to complete, 3 years of reduced income and increased expenses, 3 years of being even less available to handle everyone else's crises. I sat in my car, holding the letter and feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. On one side was the life I'd been living, the endless cycle of working and giving and never having anything left for myself. On the other side was possibility, but it meant disappointing people. It meant saying no. It meant choosing myself for once. My phone buzzed with another text from Tyler. "Did you send the money yet? Landlord's getting impatient." I stared at the text, then at the acceptance letter, then back at the text. 2 paths stretched out in front of me, and for the first time in 15 years, I had to decide which direction I wanted to walk. The afternoon appointments passed in a haze. I cleaned teeth and took x-rays and made small talk about weekend plans, but my mind kept drifting to the letter in my purse. By the time I locked up the office at 5:30, I'd made a decision that terrified and excited me in equal measure. I drove to the bank and checked my account balance. After transferring money to Mom and Tyler, I had exactly $47 to my name until Friday's paycheck. But buried in my savings account, the one I'd been adding $5 or $10 to whenever I could, was $312. It wasn't enough for the nursing program deposit, but it was a start. Instead of driving straight home, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Henderson Community College. The campus was quiet at this time of day, just a few evening students, heading to class and maintenance workers finishing up their shifts. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering courage, then walked into the admissions office. The woman behind the desk looked up as I approached, and I realized I had no idea what I was going to say. "I received an acceptance letter," I started, then stopped, pulling the paper from my purse. "For the nursing program. I want to accept, but I need to know about payment plans for the deposit." She smiled, taking the letter and pulling up my file on her computer. "Congratulations, Mrs. Martinez. The nursing program is excellent. Let me see what options we have for you." As she typed and clicked through screens, I felt like I was holding my breath. This was the moment that would determine whether hope was a luxury I couldn't afford or a possibility I was finally brave enough to reach for. "Good news," she said finally. "We have a payment plan option that allows you to pay the deposit in installments over 6 weeks. Would that work better for you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She printed out the paperwork and explained the payment schedule, the class requirements, the timeline for the program. As she talked, I felt something shifting inside me, like a door that had been locked for years was finally creaking open. I signed the papers with hands that shook slightly, wrote a check for the first installment, and walked out of the building feeling like I was floating. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I'd done something just for me. Something that might lead to a better future, instead of just managing the present crisis. The feeling lasted exactly until I got home. David was exactly where I'd left him that morning, on the couch with his phone and a fresh collection of beer cans. Emma was at the kitchen table, her science project spread out around her, looking overwhelmed and frustrated. "Mom, finally," Emma said as soon as I walked in. "I really need help with this. The graph part makes no sense, and if I don't turn it in tomorrow, I'll fail the whole unit." I looked at the project, then at my daughter, then at the acceptance letter still clutched in my hand. This was the test. This was where I found out if I was really ready to change or if I'd just been kidding myself in a moment of weakness. "Emma," I said carefully, "you're going to have to figure this out yourself. I have something I need to work on tonight." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "But you always help me with projects. I don't know how to do this. You're 17 years old, and you're taking advanced placement classes. You absolutely know how to read directions and make a graph. You just haven't had to because I always do it for you." Her expression shifted from confusion to anger. "Are you serious right now?" "This is important, Mom. This affects my grade." "Then maybe you should have started working on it before the night it's due," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. David looked up from his phone, sensing drama. "What's
going on? Rebecca, just help her with the damn project so we can have some peace." And there it was, the moment where I either stepped back into my old role or stepped forward into something new. The moment where I chose between being everyone's
solution and being my own person. I looked around the kitchen, at my family staring at me like I'd lost my mind for suggesting they handle their own responsibilities. I thought about the nursing program, about the years of possibility stretching ahead of me if I was brave enough to claim them. I thought about the woman I used to be before I became everyone's safety net, and the woman I might become if I stopped catching everyone else and started building something for myself. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not helping with the project. I'm not sending Tyler any more rent money. I'm not covering Mom's bills anymore. I'm done being the person who fixes everything for everyone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's mouth fell open, David set down his phone, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking. "What has gotten into you?" David demanded, standing up from the couch. "Your family needs you, Rebecca. You can't just stop being there for people." "I've been there for everyone except myself for 15 years, I said, my voice getting stronger. "I've given and given until there's nothing left, and all any of you do is take more. I'm starting nursing school in January, and things are going to change around here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized there was no taking them back. I'd crossed a line, burned a bridge, chosen a side. For better or worse, I'd finally chosen myself. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like exactly the right choice. The argument that followed my announcement lasted until nearly midnight. David paced around the living room like a caged animal, gesturing wildly and raising his voice until the neighbors started banging on the walls. Emma cried, pleaded, and then tried her usual manipulation tactics when the tears didn't work. They tag-teamed me with guilt, frustration, and complete bewilderment at why I would suddenly decide to be so selfish. "You're being ridiculous, Rebecca," David said for the 10th time, running his hands through his unwashed hair. "We're a family. Families help each other. You can't just decide to stop caring about everyone." "I'm not stopping caring," I replied, my voice hoarse from explaining the same thing over and over. "I'm stopping enabling. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Emma demanded, her mascara smeared from crying. "You're abandoning us when we need you most." I looked at my 17-year-old daughter, this young woman who was smart, enough to take advanced classes but somehow couldn't figure out how to make a graph or do her own laundry or pack her own lunch. When had I done this to her? When had I made her so helpless that asking her to do a school project felt like abandonment? "Emma, you're going to college next year," I said gently. "What's going to happen when I'm not there to do your assignments? For you? When you have to figure out how to manage your own schedule and handle your own problems?" She stared at me like the question had never occurred to her. "That's different. College is different." "How is it different?" Because you'll still be here to help when I need it." And there it was, the assumption that I would always be available, always ready to drop everything and solve whatever crisis came up. The assumption that my life existed solely to make everyone else's life easier. I went to bed that night with David sleeping on the couch and Emma refusing to speak to me. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe this was just what mothers and wives were supposed to do. But then I thought about the acceptance letter, now safely tucked into my dresser drawer, and I felt that spark of hope again. For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to, something that belonged to me. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and did something I hadn't done in months. I made coffee just for myself. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet early morning light and drank it slowly, savoring the silence and the fact that for these few precious minutes, no one needed anything from me. Emma emerged from her room looking like she'd barely slept, clutching the science project she'd apparently finished on her own. She didn't speak to me, just grabbed a granola bar and her backpack and left for school without her usual requests for lunch money or reminders about after-school pickup. David shuffled out later, still wearing yesterday's clothes and sporting an impressive case of bedhead. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're really serious about this," he said finally. "Yes. The nursing thing too? Especially the nursing thing." He sipped his coffee, frowning. "Rebecca, we can't afford for you to go to school. You barely make enough as it is, and if you're in classes at night, you can't pick up extra shifts." This was David's way of approaching problems. Not what's best for me or what would make me happy, but what was most convenient for our current situation. The situation where he stayed home all day while I worked to support the family. "I'll figure it out," I said. "How? You think money just grows on trees?" I set down my coffee cup and looked at him directly. "David, when's the last time you actually looked for a job?" His face darkened. "I look every day. You have no idea how hard it is out there. Show me." "What?" "Show me your job applications. Show me the interviews you've been on. Show me what you've been doing all day while I'm at work supporting this family." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to prove anything to you. I know what I'm doing." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been sitting on that couch for 8 months while I work myself to death trying to keep us afloat. That's not fair. Isn't it? When's the last time you cooked dinner? When's the last time you did laundry or cleaned the bathroom or helped Emma with homework? When's the last time you did anything besides drink beer and complain about how hard your life is?" The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but once they started flowing, I couldn't stop them. 15 years of resentment and exhaustion poured out of me like water from a broken dam. David stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something closer to shock. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and didn't recognize what he was looking at. "Fine," he said finally. "If that's how you really feel, maybe we need to talk about more than just nursing school." He left the apartment without another word, and I sat alone in the kitchen feeling like I'd just jumped off a cliff. But instead of falling, I felt like I was floating. Scared, yes, but also strangely free. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 6 years, and spent the morning doing something revolutionary. Nothing. I didn't clean Emma's room or wash David's dishes or call my mother to check on her electric bill situation. I sat on the couch with a book I'd been trying to read for months and actually read it. Around noon, my phone started buzzing with the usual cascade of demands. Tyler needed grocery money. Mom wanted me to drive her to a doctor's appointment. Carmen had questions about the loan paperwork. I looked at each message, felt the familiar knot of obligation forming in my stomach, and then did something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I turned off my phone. The silence was incredible. No emergencies, no guilt trips, no requests for money I didn't have. Just me, sitting in my own living room, reading a book and drinking tea from my favorite mug. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spent an entire afternoon doing exactly what I wanted to do. That evening, I drove to Barnes & Noble and bought 3 things I'd been wanting for months but had never justified spending money on. A study guide for nursing prerequisites, a small notebook with lined pages, and a fancy coffee drink that cost more than I usually spent on lunch. I sat in their cafe for 2 hours, making lists and plans and feeling more like myself than I had in years. When I got home, Emma was in the kitchen making herself a sandwich. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see she'd been crying again. "Where were you?" she asked, and for the first time, there was genuine concern in her voice instead of just accusation. "I went to the bookstore," I said, showing her my purchases. She examined the nursing study guide with a frown. "You're really going to do this?" "I'm really going to do this." "But what about us? What about me?" I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had breakfast together thousands of times, where I'd helped her with homework and listened to her teenage drama, and tried to be the mother I thought she needed. "Emma, I love you more than anything in this world," I said. "But loving you doesn't mean I have to disappear. For the past 17 years, I've been Rebecca the mother and Rebecca the wife and Rebecca the daughter, but I've forgotten how to just be Rebecca. I need to find that person again." "But I need you," she said, her voice small. "You do need me, but you don't need me to do everything for you. You're smart and capable and strong, and I've been doing you a disservice by not letting you figure things out on your own." She was quiet for a long moment, picking at the crust of her sandwich. "I was scared about the science project," she finally admitted. "The graph part really was confusing." "Did you figure it out?" "Yeah, it took me like 3 hours, and I had to watch 4 different YouTube videos, but I got it done. How did that feel?" She shrugged, but I caught a hint of a smile. "Pretty good, actually. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was one of the better projects in the class. I'm proud of you." "You're proud of me for doing my own homework?" "I'm proud of you for not giving up when it got difficult. That's a skill you're going to need a lot more than you think." David came home around 10 o'clock, sober for once but looking defeated. He found me in the bedroom, reading my nursing study guide and making notes in my new notebook. "We need to talk," he said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "Okay. I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about the job thing." He stared at his hands, not meeting my eyes. "You're right. I haven't been trying as hard as I should have been." This was not what I'd expected. David admitting fault was about as rare as snow in July. "I got comfortable," he continued. "I know that's not fair to you. I know you've been carrying everything and I've been letting you." "Why?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because it was easier," he said finally. "Because you're so good at handling everything, and I'm not. I'm not good at much of anything anymore." I closed my book and really looked at my husband. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the confident man I'd married and become this defeated stranger who drank too much and complained too often. When had that happened? And how had I missed it? "David, when did you stop believing in yourself?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Probably around the time I got laid off from the warehouse job. That was the 3rd job I'd lost in 5 years, and I started thinking maybe everyone was right. Maybe I really wasn't worth much." "Who said you weren't worth much?" "My dad, mostly. Every boss who ever fired me. Hell, probably you, when you look at me sitting on that couch day after day." The conversation was heading into territory we'd never explored before, and I realized that maybe David's unemployment wasn't just about laziness or lack of motivation. Maybe it was about something deeper. "I don't think you're worthless," I said quietly, "but I do think you've been hiding." "From what?" "From life, from responsibility, from the possibility of failing again." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "But you can't avoid failure by avoiding everything. And I can't keep protecting you from consequences." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm going to nursing school, and things are going to change around here. I'm not going to be available to handle every crisis and solve every problem. You're going to have to step up." "And if I can't?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. This was the moment where I had to decide if I was really committed to changing my life or if I was just going through the motions. Then, "You'll figure it out," I said, "because the alternative is figuring out how to manage without me." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I'd just said. Not a threat exactly, but a boundary. A line in the sand that I was finally ready to draw. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll start looking harder. Really looking. Good. And Rebecca, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for letting you carry everything alone. It wasn't enough to fix 15 years of imbalance, but it was a start. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, it felt like we were having an actual conversation instead of just managing logistics. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. David actually did start job hunting more seriously, spending hours at the library using their computers to submit applications, and even going on 2 interviews. Emma began doing her own homework without being asked, though she still grumbled about it. And I started preparing for nursing school, like my life depended on it. I checked out books on anatomy and physiology from the library. I practiced math problems during my lunch breaks. I researched study techniques and time management strategies, trying to figure out how I was going to balance work, school, and family responsibilities without completely losing my mind. The hardest part was learning to say no. When Tyler called, asking for money, I told him I wasn't available to help anymore and suggested he contact local assistance programs. When Mom complained about various bills and expenses, I listened sympathetically but didn't offer to solve her problems. When Carmen called with updates about Isabella's surgery costs, I provided emotional support but didn't take on additional financial obligations. Each no felt like ripping off a bandage, painful in the moment, but ultimately necessary for healing. 3 weeks after my kitchen table revolution, I had my first real test. Emma came down with what appeared to be the flu on a Tuesday morning, the same day I had an important patient consultation at work, and David had a job interview at a construction company. The old Rebecca would have called in sick immediately, spent the day making soup and fetching medicine and worrying herself into exhaustion. The new Rebecca looked at her daughter, assessed that she was sick but not dying, and made a different choice. "There's soup in the cabinet and medicine in the bathroom," I told Emma, who was sprawled dramatically across the couch looking pitiful. "Text me if you need anything serious, but otherwise just rest and drink lots of fluids." "You're leaving me alone when I'm sick?" she asked, her voice weak but accusatory. "You're 17 years old with a mild fever, not a toddler with pneumonia. You'll be fine. But what if I get worse? Then you'll call me, and I'll come home. But you probably won't get worse. You'll probably sleep all day and feel better tomorrow." I kissed her forehead, grabbed my keys, and left for work before I could change my mind. It felt like the most selfish thing I'd ever done, and also like the most necessary. At lunch, I called to check on her. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy but not particularly worse. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," she said, but there was less drama in her voice than there had been that morning. "But I made myself some tea and found that soup you bought. The chicken noodle one." "Good. Did you take any medicine?" "Yeah, the ibuprofen helped with the headache." "I'm proud of you for taking care of yourself." "It's not that hard," she admitted. "I just thought... I don't know. I thought you were supposed to do it." "I'm supposed to be here if you really need me, but you're old enough to handle being sick on your own." When I got home that evening, Emma was sitting up on the couch watching television and looking significantly better. David was in the kitchen cooking dinner, which was so unprecedented that I stood in the doorway staring for a full minute. "How did the interview go?" I asked. "Good, I think. They said they'd call by Friday." He stirred something that smelled like pasta sauce and actually looked edible. "How was work?" "Busy. How's our patient?" "Feeling better," Emma called from the couch, And hungry. Dad's making spaghetti. Since when do you cook? I asked David. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I looked up a recipe online. Figured it was time I learned. I sat down at the kitchen table and watched my husband cook dinner while my daughter recovered from being sick without my constant attention. It was such a normal family scene, but it felt revolutionary. Like we were all figuring out how to be functional adults instead of just playing our usual dysfunctional roles. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Emma knocked on my bedroom. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happier now? Since you started this whole independence thing? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the practical aspects of changing our family dynamics that I hadn't really stopped to consider my emotional state. Yeah, I said, surprised by how true it felt. I think I am. Good, she said simply. You seemed really sad before, like all the time. I thought it was because of us. Oh, Emma, no. It wasn't because of you. It was because I'd forgotten how to exist as my own person. I'm glad you remembered. She hugged me then, a real hug that lasted longer than our usual quick embraces, and I felt something shift between us. Not the desperate dependence we'd had before, but something healthier. Something that felt like respect. A week later, David got the construction job. It wasn't glamorous work, and the pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady, and it came with benefits. The night he got the call, he took me out to dinner at a restaurant we hadn't been able to afford in months. Thank you, he said over cheap wine and pasta that wasn't as good as what he'd made at home. For what? For kicking my ass, for not letting me hide anymore. He reached across the table and took my hand. I forgot who I was for a while there. I forgot that I used to be someone you could count on. You can be that person again. I'm going to try. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We still had problems, still struggled with money and communication and old habits that died hard. But something fundamental had changed. We were starting to function as a team instead of me carrying everyone else. The night before my first nursing class, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through worst-case scenarios and wondering if I was crazy for thinking I could handle work and school and family all at the same time. Maybe I was too old to go back to school. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe I was setting myself up for failure in the most public way possible. But when my alarm went off the next morning, I got up and got dressed and drove to Henderson Community College with my new notebook and 3 sharpened pencils. I sat in a classroom full of people who were mostly younger than me but all pursuing the same goal, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The instructor, Mrs. Valdez, introduced herself and talked about the program requirements and expectations. Then she asked us to go around the room and share why we decided to become nurses. When it was my turn, I stood up on shaky legs and looked around at the faces of my classmates. My name is Rebecca Martinez, I said. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been taking care of everyone except myself. I want to learn how to take care of people professionally, but I also want to prove to myself that it's not too late to build the life I actually want. The words came out steadier than I'd expected, and when I sat down, several people nodded, in understanding. I wasn't the only one starting over. I wasn't the only one who'd spent years putting everyone else first. As Mrs. Valdez began her first lecture on basic anatomy, I opened my notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page. February 15th. The day I officially started becoming the person I'd always meant to be. The work was harder than I'd anticipated. Memorizing bone structures and muscle groups while working full-time and managing family responsibilities meant I was constantly exhausted. I studied during my lunch breaks, read textbooks while dinner cooked, and stayed up until midnight reviewing notes and preparing for exams. But for the first time in years, I was tired from doing something I'd chosen rather than something that had been imposed on me. The exhaustion felt purposeful instead of defeating. 3 months into the program, I passed my first major exam with an 87%. I sat in my car in the college parking lot, staring at the grade written in red ink at the top of the paper, and cried. Not from stress or frustration, but from pure joy. I was actually doing this. I was actually succeeding at something that mattered to me. When I got home that night, Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework without being reminded, and David was loading the dishwasher. They both looked up when I walked in, and I must have been grinning because Emma immediately asked what had happened. "I got my test grade back," I said, showing them the paper. 87%, Emma exclaimed. "Mom, that's awesome." David came over and looked at the exam, his face serious. "Rebecca, I'm proud of you," he said. "Really proud." "Thanks. No, I mean it. You're doing something incredible here. You're changing your whole life and you're succeeding." Later that night, as I was studying for my next exam, I thought about how different everything felt compared to 6 months ago. I was busier than ever, but I wasn't overwhelmed. I was challenged, but I wasn't defeated. I was tired, but I wasn't depleted. For the first time in 15 years, I was building something instead of just maintaining it, and that made all the difference. 6 months into nursing school, I discovered something remarkable about myself. I was good at this. Not just competent or getting by, but genuinely talented at understanding complex medical concepts and applying them in practical situations. My study group had started coming to me with questions about pharmacology and pathophysiology, and I found myself explaining things in ways that made sense to other people. It was a Thursday evening during our clinical skills lab, when Mrs. Valdez pulled me aside after we'd finished practicing IV insertions on the simulation arms. "Rebecca, can I speak with you for a moment?" My stomach dropped. In my experience, being pulled aside by instructors usually meant trouble. Maybe I'd made a mistake during the procedure, or perhaps my technique wasn't up to standards. I'd been so focused on proving I belonged in this program that every interaction felt like a test I might fail. "Of course," I said, following her to a quiet corner of the lab while my classmates cleaned up their stations. "I've been watching your progress this semester," Mrs. Valdez began, and I braced myself for criticism. "Your test scores are consistently in the top 10%. Your clinical skills are advancing rapidly, and your classmates clearly respect your insights during group discussions." I blinked, not sure where this was going. "Thank you. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in becoming a peer tutor. We have several first-semester students who are struggling, and I think you'd be an excellent mentor for them." A peer tutor, me, the woman who 6 months ago couldn't even stand up to her own family, was being asked to help guide other students through their nursing education. "I'd love to," I said, probably too quickly. "I mean, yes. I think I'd really enjoy that." "Wonderful. It comes with a small stipend. Nothing substantial, but every little bit helps when you're juggling school and work." The stipend wasn't much, maybe enough to cover gas money and coffee, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that someone saw me as capable, as having something valuable to offer. It had been so long since I'd felt truly useful rather than just necessary. That night, I called my sister Carmen to share the news. We'd been talking more regularly since I'd stopped automatically agreeing to solve everyone's problems, and our conversations had become actual exchanges instead of one-sided crisis management sessions. "Rebecca, that's incredible," Carmen said, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. "You're basically becoming the person everyone turns to for help because you actually know what you're talking about, not because you can't say no." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, people were seeking me out for my expertise, rather than my willingness to fix things. It felt like discovering a superpower I never knew I had. The tutoring sessions started the following week. I met with 3 students who were struggling with different aspects of the program. Maria was brilliant, but had terrible test anxiety that caused her to second-guess herself into wrong answers. James understood the material, but couldn't organize his study time effectively. And Sarah, who was about my age and returning to school after raising 4 children, was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information we were expected to absorb. Working with Sarah felt like looking into a mirror. She had the same frazzled energy I recognized from my early days in the program. The same underlying fear that maybe she was too old or too out of practice to succeed at something this demanding. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed during our second session, staring at her pathophysiology textbook like it was written in ancient Greek. My youngest just started kindergarten, and I thought that meant I'd have time to focus on school, but I still feel like I'm drowning. "What does your support system look like at home?" I asked, remembering my own struggles with family dynamics. "Support system?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My husband thinks this whole nursing thing is a phase. He keeps asking when I'm going to get a real job, like working at the grocery store was somehow more legitimate than this." I recognized that tone, the exhaustion that came from fighting for your dreams while the people closest to you actively undermined them. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why do you want to be a nurse?" She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her textbook. "When my son Marcus was little, he had to be hospitalized for pneumonia. The nurses there were incredible. They didn't just take care of him medically, they took care of me too. They explained everything, helped me understand what was happening, made me feel like I wasn't completely helpless." She looked up at me. "I want to be that person for other families. I want to be the one who makes a terrifying situation a little less scary." "That's a beautiful reason. But I'm starting to think beautiful reasons don't pay the bills or get you through organic chemistry." I thought about my own journey, about the night I'd sat at my kitchen table and decided to choose myself for the first time. "Sarah, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. You can't wait for other people to believe in your dreams before you pursue them. You have to believe in them enough for everyone." We spent the next hour breaking down her study schedule and identifying specific areas where she needed the most help. By the end of our session, she looked less overwhelmed and more determined. "Thank you," she said as we packed up our books. "Not just for the study help, but for understanding. Most people don't get what it's like to start over at our age." "We're not starting over," I corrected her. "We're just getting started." The tutoring work energized me in ways I hadn't expected. I started looking forward to our sessions as much as my regular classes, and I found myself thinking about teaching techniques and learning strategies during my commute to work. Dr. Patterson had noticed the change in my demeanor too, though he didn't know the cause. "You seem different lately, Rebecca," he observed one afternoon as we cleaned up after the last patient. "More confident, I guess. Are you taking some kind of self-improvement class?" "Something like that," I said, not ready to explain the whole nursing school situation to him. I'd been keeping my education plans quiet at work, partly because I wasn't sure how he'd react to knowing I was planning to leave eventually, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed before announcing it to the world. But my secret was getting harder to keep. Medical terminology had started creeping into my conversations, and I'd caught myself correcting a patient's understanding of a procedure they were having done. Dr. Patterson was observant enough to notice these changes, and I realized I'd need to have a conversation with him sooner rather than later. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, when he asked me to stay after work to discuss something important. I spent the day convinced I was about to be fired, running through possible explanations for any mistakes I might have made recently. "Rebecca, I want to talk to you about your future here," he said once the office was empty. My heart sank. "Okay. I've been thinking about expanding the practice, maybe bringing in a nurse practitioner to handle some of the routine procedures and patient education. It would mean more responsibility for my staff, more opportunities for advancement." I stared at him, not sure what he was getting at. "That sounds like a good opportunity for whoever you hire." "I was thinking it might be a good opportunity for you." "For me?" You've always been interested in the medical side of things, and you have a natural way with patients. I'd be willing to sponsor your education if you were interested in pursuing nursing or becoming a medical assistant." The irony was almost too much to handle. Here was Dr. Patterson, offering to pay for the education I was already getting, completely unaware that I was 6 months into a nursing program and loving every minute of it. "Dr. Patterson, that's incredibly generous," I said carefully. "But I should probably tell you something." I explained about nursing school, about the classes and clinical rotations and my plans to eventually work in a hospital setting. I watched his expression shift from surprise to what looked like disappointment. "So you're planning to leave?" he said flatly. "Not immediately. I still have 2.5 years left in the program, and I'd like to stay here as long as it works, for both of us." He nodded slowly, processing this information. "I have to say, I'm surprised you didn't mention this before. I wanted to make sure I could handle it before I told anyone. And honestly, I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. Rebecca, you've been working here for 6 years. You're one of the most reliable employees I've ever had. If you want to become a nurse, I think that's fantastic." The conversation that followed was unlike any I'd ever had with an employer. Dr. Patterson was genuinely interested in my studies, asked thoughtful questions about the program, and even offered to adjust my schedule to accommodate clinical rotations when they started. "The truth is," he said as we locked up the office, "I've always thought you were overqualified for this position. You have instincts and insights that go beyond what we typically see in dental hygienists. I'm glad you're pursuing something that will use more of your abilities." I drove home that night feeling like I was floating 6 inches off the ground. Not only had my boss not fired me for pursuing other interests, but he'd essentially validated everything I'd been feeling about my potential for growth and advancement. At home, I found Emma in the kitchen making dinner. Not heating up something frozen or ordering takeout, but actually cooking. She had chicken breasts in a pan, vegetables roasting in the oven, and rice steaming on the stove. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my purse and inhaling the amazing smells. "Dad's working late tonight, and I figured you'd be tired when—" "You got home from class," she said, not looking up from the stove. "Plus, I wanted to try that recipe I saw on Instagram." Emma had been slowly becoming more independent over the past few months, taking on household responsibilities without being asked and showing genuine interest in learning life skills. But this was the first time she'd taken initiative to take care of me instead of expecting to be taken care of. "This is wonderful, Em. Thank you. How was class?" I told her about Mrs. Valdez's offer to make me a peer tutor, about the conversation with Dr. Patterson, about feeling like all the pieces of my new life were finally starting to come together. She listened while stirring the vegetables, asking questions and making comments that showed she was actually paying attention. "Mom, can I ask you something?" she said as we sat down to eat. "Of course." "Are you proud of me?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know I was pretty terrible for a while there, when you first started setting boundaries and everything. I was angry and selfish, and I made things harder for you." I set down my fork and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being the helpless teenager who couldn't pack her own lunch and had become this thoughtful young woman who cooked dinner and asked meaningful questions. "Emma, I have always been proud of you. Even when you were driving me crazy, even when you were testing every boundary I tried to set. You're smart and funny and kind, and you're learning to be responsible and independent." "I was scared," she admitted. "When you stopped doing everything for me, I was scared I wouldn't be able to figure it out on my own." And how do you feel now?" She smiled, looking more confident than I'd seen her in years. Like I can handle whatever comes next. After dinner, Emma insisted on cleaning up while I studied. I sat at the kitchen table with my textbooks spread out around me, reviewing material for an upcoming exam on cardiac anatomy and listened to the sounds of my daughter washing dishes and humming to herself. David came home around 9, tired but in a good mood. His construction job had been going well, and while the work was physically demanding, he seemed to have regained some of the confidence he'd lost during his months of unemployment. "How are my 2 favorite students?" he asked, kissing the top of my head and ruffling Emma's hair. "Mom got asked to be a tutor," Emma announced proudly. "Really? That's fantastic, Rebecca." He sat down across from me, examining the heart diagram. I'd been studying. "This is incredibly complex," he said. "I don't know how you keep all of this straight in your head." "Practice," I said. "Lots and lots of practice." "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I know I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of what you're doing. Not just the school thing, but everything. The way you've changed our whole family dynamic, the way you've stuck to your boundaries even when we made it difficult. These moments of recognition and support from my family still felt surreal. For so long, I'd been the invisible foundation that everything else was built on. Having them actually see my efforts and acknowledge my growth felt like being given. A gift I hadn't known I was waiting for. The following month brought my first clinical rotation at Tampa General Hospital. I'd been nervous about working in a real medical environment, worried that I'd make mistakes or feel out of place among experienced healthcare professionals. But from the moment I walked onto the medical surgical unit wearing my student nurse uniform, I felt like I'd found my calling. My clinical instructor, Nurse Rodriguez, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been working in hospitals for over 20 years. She had the kind of competence and confidence I aspired to, and she didn't tolerate students who weren't serious about learning. "Martinez," she said on my first day, consulting her clipboard, "you're working with Mrs. Chen in room 314, post-operative appendectomy, day 2. I want you to do her morning assessment and report back to me." Walking into that hospital room and introducing myself as a nursing student felt like stepping into a new version of myself. Mrs. Chen was a woman in her 60s who'd had emergency surgery 2 days earlier and was recovering well but feeling anxious about going home. "I've never had surgery before," she confided as I checked her vital signs. "I don't know what to expect when I get home. What if something goes wrong?" I found myself drawing on skills I didn't even know I'd developed, explaining her discharge, instructions in simple terms, reassuring her about normal healing processes, and helping her understand what symptoms would warrant a call to her doctor. By the end of our interaction, she looked visibly more relaxed. "You're very good at this," she told me. "You have a calming presence." When I reported back to Nurse Rodriguez, she nodded approvingly. "Mrs. Chen seems much more at ease. What did you talk about?" I explained our conversation, the concerns Mrs. Chen had expressed, and how I'd addressed them. Nurse Rodriguez listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about my assessment findings. "Good instincts," she said finally. "You picked up on her anxiety and addressed it appropriately. That's not something we can teach in a classroom." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the clinical experience with an enthusiasm that surprised even me. I arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for every learning opportunity that came up. I practiced starting IVs until my technique was smooth and confident. I learned to read EKG strips and recognize abnormal rhythms. I studied medication interactions and side effects until I could anticipate problems before they occurred. But more than the technical skills, I was learning to be the kind of nurse I'd always imagined in my head, the one who listened to patients' fears and took them seriously, the one who explained procedures clearly and made sure people understood what was happening to their bodies, the one who advocated for patients when they couldn't advocate for themselves. 3 months into my clinical rotation, I had an experience that solidified everything I'd been feeling about this career choice. I was assigned to work with Mr. Williams, an elderly man who'd been admitted with pneumonia and was having trouble breathing. He was scared and confused, pulling at his oxygen mask and trying to get out of bed despite being too weak to stand. His daughter was at his bedside, looking exhausted and frustrated. "He's been like this all night," she told me. The other nurse gave him something to calm down, but it's not helping. I sat down next to Mr. Williams's bed and spoke to him quietly, making eye contact and using a calm, steady voice. I explained where he was and why he needed to keep the oxygen mask on. I asked him what was worrying him most, and he managed to tell me that he was afraid he was going to die and that no one would tell his wife what happened to him. It turned out his wife was in a memory care facility and didn't know he was in the hospital. He was terrified that she'd be waiting for him to visit and wouldn't understand why he didn't come. I worked with his daughter to arrange for someone to visit his wife and explain the situation. We called the memory care facility and spoke with the staff about how to help her understand. Within an hour, Mr. Williams was calmer and more cooperative with his treatment. "How did you know to ask about his wife?" his daughter asked me later. "Sometimes when people are scared and confused, there's something specific they're worried about," I explained. "It's not always about the medical situation. Sometimes it's about the people they're leaving behind." That night, I drove home thinking about the difference between being needed and being useful. For years, I'd been needed by my family in ways that weren't healthy for any of us. But in the hospital, I was useful in ways that actually helped people solve problems and feel better. When I got home, Emma was at the kitchen table working on college applications. She'd been accepted to several schools and was trying to decide between staying local and going away for her education. "How was clinical?" she asked, looking up from her laptop. "Amazing. Challenging, but amazing." "I've been thinking about what you said before, about choosing myself," she said. "I think I want to go to the University of Florida. It's far enough away that I'll have to figure things out on my own, but not so far that I can't come home when I need to." I sat down next to her, looking at the application she'd been working on. "That sounds like a perfect choice. Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. Like for the first time, I feel like I'm making decisions based on what I want instead of what's easiest or safest." "That's exactly how I felt when I started nursing school." "Yeah?" she smiled. "Well, look how that turned out. Maybe scared and excited is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later that night, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea, reviewing notes from my clinical rotation and thinking about how much my life had changed in less than a year. I was no longer the woman who stood in her kitchen at 2 a.m. feeling overwhelmed by everyone else's problems. I was becoming someone who solved problems professionally, who used her skills to help people in meaningful ways. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, one of the students I'd been tutoring. "Passed my pharmacology exam with an 89%. Thank you for not letting me give up." I smiled, typing back my congratulations and feeling a warm sense of satisfaction. Not the desperate validation that came from being needed by dysfunctional people, but the quiet pride that came from helping someone achieve their goals. David found me on the balcony an hour later, reading about cardiac medications by the light from the kitchen window. "You're going to ruin your eyes reading out here," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "Probably. But I have an exam tomorrow, and I want to make sure I understand the difference between ACE inhibitors and beta blockers." "I still can't believe how smart you are," he said. "I mean, I always knew you were smart, but seeing you master all this medical stuff, it's incredible." I think I'm just finally using my brain for something that interests me. "Rebecca, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I used to be jealous of you. Even when I was unemployed and you were working and supporting everyone, I was jealous because you seemed so capable, so together. I felt like a failure compared to you." I set down my notes and looked at him. "David, you're not a failure. I know that now. But for a while there, I forgot. And instead of trying to become better, I just gave up and let you carry everything." He paused. "Watching you go after this nursing thing, seeing you refuse to settle for less than what you wanted, it reminded me that I used to have ambitions too." "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about maybe taking some business classes. Maybe working toward becoming a project manager or a foreman. I'm good at construction work, but I think I could be good at the planning and organizing side too. This was the first time David had talked about future goals in years. Not just surviving until the next paycheck, but actually building toward something better. I think that's a wonderful idea. You think I could handle it? College courses? David, you've been managing complex construction projects for months. You coordinate schedules and materials and workers. You absolutely have the skills for business classes. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us thinking about the future we were building. A year ago, our conversations had been about immediate crises and survival. Now we were talking about growth and possibilities. We're going to be okay, David said finally. All of us. We're going to be better than okay. I thought about Emma's college plans, about David's career ambitions, about my own nursing goals, and realized he was right. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving, each of us in our own way, each of us finally becoming the people we were meant to be. The call came at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, just as I was settling into bed after finishing a particularly challenging assignment on respiratory pathophysiology. The phone's shrill ring cut through the quiet apartment, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that it was going to be some kind of emergency. Tyler's name flashed on the display, and my stomach immediately knotted. My son hadn't called me in almost 4 months, not since I'd stopped automatically sending money every time he asked. The last conversation we'd had was brief and uncomfortable, ending with him accusing me of caring more about school than my own children. "Mom?" His voice was shaky, and I could hear sirens in the background. "Tyler, what's wrong?" "I'm at the hospital. I was in an accident, and they're saying I need surgery, but I don't have insurance, and they want someone to guarantee payment." The words tumbled out in a rush, panic making his voice higher than usual. "Mom, I'm scared. There's a lot of blood, and they're talking about emergency surgery, and I don't know what to do." Every maternal instinct I'd spent the past year learning to control came roaring back to life. My baby was hurt and scared and needed me. The old Rebecca would have been in the car within minutes, rushing to the hospital with promises to handle everything and assurances that money didn't matter when someone's life was at stake. "Where are you?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "Tampa General, emergency room." "Mom, can you come? Can you talk to them about the payment stuff? I know you're mad at me about everything, but I really need you right now." I paused with one arm in my jacket sleeve. Tampa General was where I'd been doing my clinical rotations for the past 6 months. I knew the emergency department, knew how it worked, knew exactly what Tyler was facing. And I also knew that emergency rooms were required by law to provide care regardless of insurance status. "Tyler, listen to me carefully. You don't need anyone to guarantee payment for emergency surgery. If you need immediate medical care, they have to provide it. That's federal law." "But they said..." "I know what they said. They're required to inform you about costs and insurance, but they cannot refuse to treat you if it's an emergency." I sat down on the edge of my bed, forcing myself to think like a nurse instead of a panicked mother. "Tell me exactly what happened and what they've told you about your injuries." He explained that he'd been in a motorcycle accident, that he had a broken leg that might need surgical repair, and some cuts that required stitches. Painful and scary, definitely, but not life-threatening. "Tyler, you're going to be okay. Let me talk to the nurse who's taking care of you." "Mrs. Martinez?" The voice that came on the phone was familiar. Nancy Chen, one of the night shift nurses I'd worked with during my emergency department rotation. "Nancy, it's Rebecca. Tyler is my son." Oh my goodness, I didn't make the connection. "Rebecca, he's going to be fine. The orthopedic surgeon wants to repair the leg fracture tonight, and he'll need a few days in the hospital, but his injuries aren't life-threatening." "What's this about insurance and payment guarantees?" Nancy sighed. Financial services got to him before I could intercept. You know how they are. Technically, we can't require payment guarantees for emergency care, but they like to try to get commitments before people understand their rights. Can you make sure Tyler understands that he's going to receive appropriate care, regardless of his insurance status? Absolutely. And Rebecca, don't worry. We'll take good care of him. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark apartment. My heart still racing, but my mind clearer than it had been since the phone first rang. Tyler was safe. He was getting appropriate medical care, and I didn't need to rescue him financially or emotionally. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get in the car, drive to the hospital, and take charge of the situation. To make sure he had a private room, to demand the best surgeon, to promise to pay whatever it cost to make sure he received premium care. Instead, I called David. Rebecca? What's wrong? I explained about Tyler's accident and his current situation. David listened without interrupting, and I could hear him processing the information. So he's okay, but he's trying to get you to come fix the financial part, he said finally. That's about the size of it. Are you going? The question hung between us. 6 months ago, the answer would have been automatic. Of course I was going. I was his mother. It was my job to handle crises and solve problems and make sure everyone else's life ran smoothly. I don't think so, I said, surprised by how the words sounded coming out of my mouth. Good, David said simply. He's 22 years old and this is something he needs to handle himself. But what if he really needs help? What if there are complications or problems with his care? Then you'll help him navigate those when they happen. But Rebecca, rushing down there in the middle of the night to promise to pay bills he can't afford, isn't helping him. It's enabling him. David was right, and I knew it. But that didn't make sitting at home any easier. I called the hospital back and asked to speak with Tyler again. Mom, are you coming? He asked immediately. No, Tyler, I'm not. What do you mean you're not coming? I'm in the hospital. You're in the hospital receiving appropriate medical care from competent professionals. You're not dying, and you're not alone. But what about the money? What about the bills? You'll figure it out. There are payment plans and financial assistance programs. The hospital has social workers who can help you understand your options. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought he'd hung up. I can't believe you're doing this, he said finally, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. Your own son is in the hospital, and you're worried about teaching me a lesson? Tyler, I love you. I love you enough to let you handle your own problems instead of swooping in to fix everything like I always have. That's not love, Mom. That's abandonment. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was I abandoning him? Was I so focused on maintaining my boundaries that I was failing my child when he actually needed me? Tyler, I said carefully, if you have a medical emergency or complication, if you need someone to advocate for your care or help you understand treatment options, I will be there immediately. But I'm not coming to promise to pay bills or clean up financial messes. Forget it, he said, and this time he did hang up. I sat holding the phone for several minutes, second-guessing every part of the conversation. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe this was different from all the other times he'd called asking for money. Maybe a motorcycle accident qualified as enough of a crisis that I should bend my rules. I was still debating with myself when my phone rang again. This time it was Carmen. Rebecca, Tyler called me. He said you refused to come to the hospital when he was injured? The judgment in my sister's voice was unmistakable. Carmen, who lived 2,000 miles away and hadn't spoken to Tyler in over a year, was somehow an expert on what I should be doing in this situation. He's fine, Carmen. He has a broken leg and some cuts. He's getting appropriate medical care. But he said you wouldn't help with the hospital bills. He's 22 years old. He's responsible for his own bills. Rebecca, he's your child. You don't just stop being a mother because your kids become adults. This was exactly the argument I'd been having with myself for the past hour, but hearing it from Carmen crystallized something for me. The problem wasn't that I was stopping being a mother. The problem was that I'd never learned how to be a healthy mother in the first place. Carmen, when Tyler was 18 and crashed his first car because he was driving drunk, I paid to fix it and get him a new one. When he was 19 and got evicted from his apartment for not paying rent, I found him a new place and paid the deposits. When he was 20 and lost his job for not showing up, I supported him for 4 months while he supposedly looked for work. I took a breath, feeling the weight of all those decisions settling on my shoulders. I've been rescuing Tyler from consequences for his entire adult life, and all it's done is teach him that someone else will always fix his problems. I'm not stopping being his mother. I'm starting to be a better one. You sound cold, Rebecca. You sound like you don't care about your own son. I care about him enough to let him grow up. Carmen hung up without saying goodbye, and I realized I'd probably just damaged another family relationship. But for the first time in years, I wasn't automatically assuming that was my fault or my responsibility to fix. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, alternating between confidence in my decision and terror that I was making a terrible mistake. At 5 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep and made coffee, settling at the kitchen table with my pathophysiology textbook. David found me there 2 hours later, still in my pajamas, surrounded by notes about cardiac arrhythmias and empty coffee cups. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I admitted. Every instinct I have is telling me I'm a terrible mother. And what does your rational brain tell you? I considered the question seriously. My rational brain tells me that Tyler has been counting on me to bail him out of every difficult situation for the past 4 years, and that as long as I keep doing it, he'll never learn to handle things himself. Trust your rational brain. Emma emerged from her room a few minutes later, already dressed for school and looking unusually serious. "I heard the phone ring last night," she said, pouring herself a bowl of cereal. "Was everything okay?" I explained about Tyler's accident, about the phone calls and the decisions I'd made. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "Are you worried about me?" she asked when I finished. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when I go to college next year, are you worried that I won't be able to handle things if something goes wrong?" The question caught me off guard. No, I'm not worried about that at all. "Why not?" "Because you've been learning to handle things. You've been practicing being independent and responsible. You've been making good decisions and learning from mistakes." Emma nodded slowly. "But Tyler hasn't been doing any of those things, has he?" "No, he hasn't." "So really, not rescuing him isn't about being mean to him. It's about giving him the chance to learn the stuff he should have been learning all along." My 17-year-old daughter had just articulated what I'd been struggling to understand all night. The problem wasn't that Tyler was in the hospital. The problem was that he was 22 years old and still expected other people to handle his problems for him. At work that day, Dr. Patterson noticed my distracted mood during the morning procedures. "Everything all right, Rebecca? You seem like your mind is somewhere else." I debated whether to explain, then decided I could use an outside perspective from someone who didn't have emotional investment in the situation. "My son was in a motorcycle accident last night. He's fine, but he called expecting me to come to the hospital and handle the financial aspects of his care, and I decided not to." Dr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "That must have been a difficult decision." "It was. Part of me thinks I'm being a terrible mother." "How old is your son?" 22. "Rebecca, when I was 22, I was in my first year of dental school. I was living on student loans and ramen noodles. And if I'd gotten injured, it would never have occurred to me to call my parents to handle the financial side of things. That would have been my responsibility. But what if he can't handle it? Then he'll figure it out. That's what adults do. Dr. Patterson paused, choosing his words carefully. Rebecca, I've watched you transform over the past year and a half. You've gone from someone who seemed overwhelmed and exhausted all the time to someone who's confident and focused and pursuing challenging goals. From the outside, it looks like learning to set boundaries with your family has been one of the best things you've ever done for yourself. His observation helped settle some of the anxiety that had been churning in my stomach all morning. I'd been so focused on whether I was making the right decision about Tyler that I'd lost sight of the bigger picture. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I called Tampa General to check on Tyler's condition. The nurse who answered was able to tell me that he'd had successful surgery and was recovering well. Is he asking for visitors? I asked. Actually, he has several friends here with him right now. He seems to be in good spirits. Several friends. Tyler had people in his life who cared about him and were supporting him through this crisis. People his own age who could relate to his situation and offer appropriate help. He wasn't alone and abandoned. He was surrounded by his peer group, which was exactly where a 22-year-old should be getting support. I hung up feeling lighter than I had all day. That evening, as I was getting ready for my evening clinical rotation, my phone rang again. Tyler's name on the screen made my stomach clench, but I answered it anyway. Mom? Hi, Tyler. How are you feeling? Better? The surgery went fine, and they say I'll be able to go home tomorrow. His voice was different somehow. Less angry, more subdued. I'm glad you're okay. Mom, I talked to one of the social workers here about the payment stuff. She said there are programs that can help, and they have payment plans that will make it manageable. That's good news. And I called my boss to let him know what happened, and he said the company has short-term disability insurance that will cover some of my time off work. I felt a surge of pride listening to Tyler take responsibility for his situation and advocate for himself. Tyler, you handled all of that really well. Yeah, well, I didn't have much choice. There was a pause. Mom, I was really angry at you last night. I know you were. But Marcus pointed out that I'm 22 years old, and most people my age handle their own hospital bills. Marcus was Tyler's roommate, a responsible young man who worked full-time and was taking evening classes to finish his college degree. The kind of peer influence Tyler needed more of in his life. Marcus is right. I've been thinking about some stuff while I've been lying here, Tyler continued. About how I always call you when something goes wrong, and how you always fix it, and how I never really have to figure things out for myself. What conclusions have you reached? That maybe I need to start acting like an adult instead of a kid who can call his mom whenever things get difficult. This was the conversation I'd been hoping for since Tyler turned 18, but I'd never been able to have it because I'd been too busy enabling him to avoid it. Tyler, I love you. I love you enough to let you handle your own problems and make your own mistakes and figure out how to be a functioning adult. I know, Mom. And I'm sorry I said you were abandoning me. You weren't abandoning me. You were just not rescuing me, and I guess I needed to learn the difference. After we hung up, I sat in my car outside the hospital for several minutes, feeling like I'd just witnessed something miraculous. Not Tyler's physical recovery from his accident, but his emotional growth from dependent child to responsible adult. My clinical rotation that night was in the orthopedic unit, and I found myself paying extra attention to the young patients who were recovering from injuries similar to Tyler's. I watched how they interacted with their families, how they handled discussions about discharge planning and follow-up care, and how they took responsibility for their recovery process. Most of them, I noticed, were managing their own situations with minimal parental involvement. They understood their medications, asked appropriate questions about their care, and made arrangements for transportation and follow-up appointments. They were functioning as adults, even when they were hurt and vulnerable. The contrast with Tyler's initial phone call was stark. A 22-year-old expecting his mother to rush to his bedside and handle all the complicated aspects of his situation wasn't normal or appropriate. It was the result of years of learned helplessness that I had inadvertently created by being too helpful for too long. At the end of my shift, I stopped by the emergency department to say hello to Nancy Chen. "How's your son doing?" she asked immediately. "Much better. He's handling the discharge planning and payment arrangements himself." Nancy smiled. "Good. For him. And good for you. I see too many parents who rush down here and take over everything, and it doesn't help anyone in the long run." "Was I wrong not to come last night?" "Rebecca, you're a nursing student. You understand medical care better than most parents. If Tyler had been in real danger or needed someone to advocate for his medical treatment, that would have been different. But wanting someone to handle the financial aspects of his care isn't a medical emergency." She was right, and her perspective as an experienced emergency room nurse helped validate the decision I'd struggled with all day. 2 weeks later, I received another test of my newfound boundaries. This time, it was my mother, calling in tears, about what she described as a financial crisis that required immediate intervention. "Rebecca, honey, I need you to come over right away. I've gotten myself into terrible trouble with my credit cards, and I don't know what to do." The familiar panic and guilt started rising in my chest, but this time I recognized the feeling and took a deep breath before responding. "What kind of trouble, Mom?" "I owe more than I can pay, and they're threatening to take me to court. I need someone to help me figure out what to do." This was different from Mom's usual requests for money to cover specific bills. This sounded like a more complex financial situation that would require real problem-solving rather than just a quick cash infusion. "Have you looked into credit counseling services?" "I don't know anything about that." "Rebecca, I need you to come over and help me sort through all these papers and figure out what to do." The old me would have dropped everything and spent the next several days organizing Mom's finances and probably co-signing loans or depleting my own savings to bail her out. The new me had different priorities. "Mom, I can't come over right now. I have an exam tomorrow that I need to study for, but I can research some credit counseling services and send you the information." "You can't come? Rebecca, this is an emergency." It's a serious situation that needs to be addressed, but it's not an emergency that requires me to drop everything immediately. The conversation that followed was painful and familiar. Mom accused me of not caring about family, of being selfish and cold, of abandoning her when she needed me most. The same accusations Tyler had made, the same guilt trips that had worked on me for decades. But this time, instead of caving to the emotional manipulation, I held my ground. "Mom, I'll help you research options and understand your choices, but I'm not going to manage your finances for you. You're a capable adult who can work with professionals to solve this problem." "But I don't understand any of this financial stuff." "Then it's time to learn. There are people whose job it is to help with exactly this situation." I spent an hour that evening researching nonprofit credit counseling services in Mom's area and emailed her a list of options along with explanations of what each service offered. I also included information about how to prepare for a credit counseling appointment and what questions to ask. It felt strange to help without taking over, to offer support without accepting responsibility for the outcome. But it also felt healthy in a way that my previous rescuing efforts never had. The real test came the following week when Emma was accepted to the University of Florida and needed to make decisions about housing, meal plans, and course registration. This was exactly the kind of situation where I would normally take charge, researching options and making recommendations and essentially managing the entire process for her. Instead, I printed out all the information the university had sent, handed it to Emma, and said, "This is your decision to make. I'm here if you want to discuss the options or have questions, but this is your college experience to plan." Emma looked at the pile of paperwork with an expression of mild panic. But there are so many choices. What if I pick the wrong dorm or choose classes that don't work out? Then you'll figure out how to change your situation. Emma, you're about to be a college student. Making decisions about your living situation and academic plans is exactly the kind of thing you need to practice. Over the next few days, I watched Emma work through the decision-making process methodically and thoughtfully. She researched different dormitories, read course descriptions carefully, and even called the university to ask questions about meal plan options. When she finally made her choices, they were well-informed decisions that reflected her actual preferences rather than my assumptions about what would be best for her. "I'm proud of how you handled all of that," I told her after she submitted her housing application. "It was actually kind of fun," she admitted. "Like, overwhelming at first. But then I started to get excited about planning my own life." That phrase stuck with me. Planning her own life. That's exactly what I'd been preventing my children from doing by managing too many aspects of their lives for them. And it was exactly what I'd started doing for myself when I'd chosen to pursue nursing school despite everyone else's resistance. The semester was winding down, and I was preparing for final exams when I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about boundaries and enabling in the most dramatic way possible. It was Tyler, and he was crying. "Mom, I'm in jail." The words hit me like ice water. Tyler, my 22-year-old son who had just learned to handle his own hospital bills, was now sitting in a jail cell at 3 a.m. calling me to fix yet another crisis. But this time felt different. This time the stakes were higher, and the consequences of enabling him could be life-altering. "Tyler, slow down and tell me exactly what happened," I said, settling into the kitchen chair and grabbing a pen and paper. Through his tears and panic, the story emerged. He'd been at a party with friends, had been drinking, and when someone suggested they all go to another location, he'd stupidly gotten behind the wheel of his car. He'd been pulled over 3 blocks from the party, arrested for DUI, and was now facing charges that could include jail time, massive fines, and the loss of his license. "Mom, I need you to call a lawyer. I need you to come down and bail me out. I can't stay in here, and I don't know what to do about any of this legal stuff." The familiar desperation in his voice triggered every protective instinct I'd spent 2 years learning to control. This wasn't about money for rent or help with hospital bills. This was about my child sitting in jail, scared and facing serious, legal consequences that could affect the rest of his life. But it was also about my child making the conscious decision to drive while intoxicated, putting his own life and the lives of innocent people at risk. This wasn't bad luck or circumstances beyond his control. This was the direct result of irresponsible choices. "Tyler, have you been assigned a public defender?" "I don't know. They said something about a lawyer, but I wasn't really listening." "Mom, please just come down here and figure this out." "I'm not coming to bail you out." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not coming to bail you out. You made the choice to drink and drive, and now you need to face the consequences of that choice." "Are you insane? I'm your son. I'm in jail." "Yes, you are. And you're there because you chose to get behind the wheel of a car when you'd been drinking." "Everyone makes mistakes, Mom. This doesn't mean I'm a terrible person." "You're right. It doesn't make you a terrible person. But it does make you someone who put innocent lives at risk, and there are consequences for that." What followed was the most painful conversation I'd ever had with one of my children. Tyler begged, pleaded, screamed, and finally resorted to the kind of emotional manipulation that had worked on me countless times before. He told me I was abandoning him when he needed me most, that I was choosing my stupid nursing school over my own family, that he would never forgive me if something happened to him in jail. Each accusation felt like a knife to my heart, but I held firm. This wasn't about punishment or lack of love. This was about allowing Tyler to experience the natural consequences of dangerous behavior instead of rescuing him from them. Tyler, if you want to call me to discuss your legal options or if you need emotional support, I'm here for you. But I'm not going to bail you out, hire you a lawyer, or fix this situation for you. Fine, he said, his voice cold with rage. Don't come. See if I ever call you again when I actually need help. The line went dead, and I sat in my dark kitchen feeling like I'd just failed the most important test of my life as a mother. Every voice in my head was screaming that I was making a terrible mistake, that loving mothers don't let their children sit in jail, that Tyler could be hurt or traumatized by this experience. I called David, waking him from a deep sleep, to explain what had happened. He's in jail for DUI, David repeated, his voice thick with sleep and disbelief. Yes. And he wants you to bail him out. Yes. And you said no. I said no. David was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca, that's the hardest thing you've ever done. I feel like I'm going to be sick. You probably are, but you did the right thing. How can you be so sure? Because Tyler driving drunk isn't a mistake. It's not bad luck or poor judgment. It's a choice that could have killed someone. If you bail him out and hire him a lawyer and make this problem go away, what's he going to learn from it? David was right, but that didn't make sitting with the decision any easier. I spent the rest of the night pacing around the apartment, alternating between certainty that I'd done the right thing and terror that I'd failed my child when he needed me most. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee. Emma found me at the kitchen table an hour later, still in my pajamas and looking like I'd been hit by a truck. Mom, what's wrong? You look terrible. I explained about Tyler's arrest and the conversation we'd had. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. So he's still in jail? As far as I know. And you're not going to bail him out? No, I'm not. Emma sat down across from me, studying my face. Mom, I know this is really hard for you, but I think you made the right choice. Do you really think so, or are you just trying to make me feel better? I really think so. Tyler has been getting away with stupid decisions his entire life because you've always fixed things for him. Maybe if he'd faced consequences before, he wouldn't have thought it was okay to drive drunk. The wisdom in my 17-year-old daughter's words was both comforting and heartbreaking. She was right that my pattern of rescuing Tyler from consequences had probably contributed to his belief that he could make dangerous choices without facing serious repercussions. I called in sick to work and to my clinical rotation, something I'd done maybe twice in the entire time I'd been in the nursing program. But I knew I wouldn't be able to focus on anything until I had a better understanding of Tyler's situation. Around noon, I called the county jail to check on his status. The officer who answered was able to tell me that Tyler had been assigned a public defender and was scheduled for arraignment the following morning. He was safe, uninjured, and had spent the night in a holding cell with other DUI arrestees. Can you tell me about bail? I asked. He'll probably be released on his own recognizance at arraignment, assuming he has somewhere to go and this is his first offense. The public defender will help him understand his options. So, Tyler would probably be released the next day without me having to bail him out. The crisis that had felt so urgent and desperate in the middle of the night was actually a fairly routine legal process that thousands of people navigated without their parents rushing to rescue them. That evening, my phone rang. Tyler's name on the screen made my heart race, but when I answered, it wasn't Tyler's voice I heard. Mrs. Martinez? This is Marcus, Tyler's roommate. Tyler asked me to call you. Is he okay? Yeah, he's okay. He got out this afternoon and came home. He's pretty shaken up, but he's okay. How is he handling everything? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Martinez, can I be honest with you? Please. Tyler was really angry at you last night. And this morning. He kept saying you'd abandoned him and that you didn't care about him. but after he met with the public defender and learned about his options, he started to understand what you were trying to do. What do you mean? The public defender told him that having family members bail him out and hire expensive lawyers sometimes makes defendants look like they're not taking responsibility for their actions. She said judges often respond better to defendants who handle their own cases through the public defender's office and show that they understand the seriousness of what they did. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. Not because Tyler's legal situation was easier than expected, but because he was starting to understand that my refusal to rescue him wasn't abandonment. Marcus, is Tyler willing to talk? To me? I think so. He's been pretty quiet all day, but he asked me to call you, so I think he wants to reconnect. When Tyler got on the phone, his voice was different than it had been the night before. Not angry or desperate, but subdued and thoughtful. Mom, I owe you an apology. Tyler, you don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do. I said some terrible things to you last night. I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you. You were facing a frightening situation. I understand why you were upset. But that's not an excuse for the things I said, and it's not an excuse for driving drunk in the first place. This was the conversation I'd been hoping to have with Tyler for years, but I'd never given him the opportunity by always rescuing him before he could reach this point of understanding. What happens now? I have a court date next month. The public defender says I'll probably get probation, community service, and a suspended license. I'll have to take DUI classes and maybe do some counseling. How do you feel about that? Honestly? Relieved. I could have killed someone, Mom. I could have killed myself. I deserve whatever consequences I get. We talked for another hour about his court date, his plans for handling the legal requirements, and his decision to stop drinking entirely while he worked through this process. It was the most mature conversation I'd ever had with my son, and it never would have happened if I'd bailed him out and hired him a lawyer. Tyler, I want you to know that I love you. Everything I've done over the past 2 years, all the boundaries I've set, and times I've said no to helping you, it's all been because I love you enough to let you grow up. I know that now, Mom. I didn't understand it before, but I get it now. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of final exams, clinical rotations, and preparation for the next semester of nursing school. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't managing anyone else's crisis alongside my own responsibilities. Tyler was handling his legal situation independently. Emma was preparing for college without my constant input. And David was thriving in his construction job and making plans to enroll in business classes. It felt surreal to have so much mental and emotional energy available for my own goals and interests. My nursing school grades for the semester were the highest they'd ever been. Without the constant distraction of family emergencies and financial crises, I was able to focus completely on my studies and clinical work. Mrs. Valdez commented on my improved performance during our end-of-semester evaluation. Rebecca, you seem much more centered this semester. Your clinical skills have advanced remarkably, and your theoretical understanding of nursing concepts has deepened significantly. Thank you. I've been able to focus more on school lately. Whatever changes you've made in your life, keep them up. You have the potential to be an exceptional nurse. That evening, I drove to the beach in St. Petersburg and sat on the sand watching the sunset. It was something I'd always wanted to do but had never made time for. Always too busy handling other people's emergencies or catching up on responsibilities I'd neglected while solving someone else's problems. As I watched the sun sink toward the horizon, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Standing in her kitchen at 2 a.m., overwhelmed by everyone else's problems and feeling like she was drowning in obligations she'd never chosen. That woman had been generous and caring and devoted to her family, but she'd also been exhausted and resentful and slowly disappearing under the weight of everyone else's needs. The woman sitting on this beach was still generous and caring and devoted to her family, but she was also whole. She had goals and interests and a sense of her own identity that existed independently of her roles as mother, wife, and daughter. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, one of the nursing students. I'd been tutoring, passed all my finals, starting my first clinical rotation next semester. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I smiled, typing back my congratulations and feeling a warm sense of satisfaction. Over the past year, I'd helped half a dozen struggling nursing students find their footing in the program, not by doing their work for them or solving their problems, but by sharing study strategies, offering encouragement, and helping them develop confidence in their own abilities. It was the same principle I'd been learning to apply with my family. The difference between helping people grow and enabling them to avoid growth. On Christmas morning, our family gathered around the small tree Emma had decorated while I was studying for finals. The dynamic was completely different from previous holidays. Instead of me cooking and cleaning and managing every aspect of the celebration while everyone else relaxed, we'd all contributed to making the day special. David had cooked the turkey, following a recipe he'd researched online and spending hours, making sure it was perfect. Emma had made side dishes and dessert, recruiting Tyler to help with the more complicated preparations. I'd made my contribution too, but it felt like participating in a family effort rather than carrying the entire load alone. Tyler gave me a card that made me cry. Inside, he'd written, "Mom, thank you for loving me enough to let me fall down and learn how to get back up. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to teach me. I'm proud to be your son, and I'm working on becoming someone you can be proud of too." Emma's gift was a photo album she'd made, documenting my journey through nursing school with pictures and clippings from my clinical rotations, study sessions, and achievements. The last page had a photo of me in my nursing student uniform with a quote she'd added. She believed she could, so she did. David's gift was practical but meaningful. He'd enrolled in spring business classes at the community college and had already paid the tuition and bought the textbooks. "I figured it was time I started building something for myself too," he said. After the gifts were opened and we'd finished breakfast, Tyler cleared his throat and announced that he had something to share with everyone. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with my life," he said. "The whole DUI thing was a wake-up call about a lot of stuff, not just drinking and driving." He paused, looking around the room at all of us. "I've decided I want to go back to school. I want to study addiction counseling. I want to help other people who are struggling with the same stuff I've been dealing with." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but thoughtful. Tyler had never expressed interest in any particular career path before, content to drift from job to job without any long-term goals. "Tyler, that sounds like meaningful work," I said finally. "What's your plan for making it happen?" "I've already met with an admissions counselor at the community college. I can start taking prerequisites in the spring while I'm doing my community service hours. It'll take a few years, but I think it's something I could be good at." "I think you could be good at it too," Emma said. "You understand what it's like to struggle, and you're getting good at taking responsibility for your choices." David nodded in agreement. "Son, I'm proud of you for thinking about your future and making a plan." Later that evening, as we cleaned up from dinner, Emma mentioned that she'd gotten her spring class schedule from the University of Florida. "I'm taking organic chemistry, statistics, psychology, and English composition," she said. "It's going to be challenging, but I'm excited." "Have you thought about what you want to major in?" I asked. "I've been thinking about physical therapy. I like the idea of helping people recover from injuries and get stronger." I smiled, recognizing the theme that seemed to be emerging in our family. All of us were gravitating toward careers that involved helping people, but in healthy, professional ways rather than the dysfunctional enabling patterns we'd fallen into before. "Physical therapy is a great field," I said. "Challenging, but rewarding." Kind of like nursing? She asked with a grin. Kind of like nursing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, working on applications for the final year of my nursing program. I'd been accepted into the critical care track, which would prepare me to work in intensive care units and emergency departments. It was the most challenging specialization available, but it was also exactly what I wanted to do. As I filled out the application forms, I thought about how different my life looked compared to 2 years ago. My son was taking responsibility for his mistakes and planning a meaningful career. My daughter was preparing for college with confidence and independence. My husband was pursuing his own educational goals and contributing equally to our household. And I was 6 months away from becoming a registered nurse, something that had seemed impossible when I was drowning in everyone else's problems and had no time or energy for my own dreams. My phone rang, and I glanced at the screen to see Carmen's name. We'd spoken only sporadically since our argument about Tyler's hospital situation, but I answered anyway. "Rebecca, I wanted to call and apologize," she said without preamble. "For what?" "For giving you grief about Tyler's situation. Miguel and I have been having some problems with Isabella's older brother, and we've been trying to decide how much to help him versus letting him figure things out on his own. Isabella was Carmen's oldest child, now 19 and struggling with college and work responsibilities. It's hard to know where to draw the line," I said. "That's exactly what I'm calling about. We've been watching what you've done with your family over the past couple of years, and we've seen how much everyone has grown. Tyler handling his own legal problems, Emma becoming so independent, David going back to school." She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "I think we've been enabling Roberto the same way you used to enable Tyler, and I think we need to learn how to be supportive without being enablers." We spent an hour talking about the difference between helping and enabling, about the importance of allowing young adults to experience consequences for their choices, and about how difficult it is to change patterns that feel like expressions of love. "Carmen, the hardest part for me was realizing that protecting my kids from consequences wasn't actually protecting them at all. It was preventing them from developing the skills they needed to be successful adults." "How did you find the strength to stop rescuing them?" "I started building a life for myself that mattered to me. When I had something meaningful to focus on, it became easier to resist the urge to drop everything and fix everyone else's problems." After we hung up, I realized that the conversation with Carmen represented something I hadn't expected when I started this journey of setting boundaries and pursuing my own goals. I'd become someone other people turn to for advice about healthy relationships and personal growth. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd done the hard work of changing dysfunctional patterns and could share what I'd learned along the way. 6 months later, I walked across the stage at my nursing school graduation wearing the white coat that represented 3 years of challenging study and clinical work. In the audience, my entire family cheered as my name was called, and I received my degree. Tyler was there, having completed his first semester of prerequisites for his addiction counseling program with a 3.7 GPA. Emma was home for spring break from the University of Florida, where she'd made the dean's list and was thriving in her pre-physical therapy courses. David was there, having just finished his first semester of business classes and already being considered for a promotion to crew leader at his construction job. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at a restaurant. That would have been far beyond our budget 2 years earlier. But now, with David working full-time, me about to start my first job as a registered nurse, and no one requiring constant financial rescue, we could afford small celebrations. "Mom, I have something to tell you," Emma said as we waited for our appetizers to arrive. "What's that?" "I got accepted to the physical therapy program for next year. Early admission." The program she was referring to was highly competitive, accepting only 30 students each year from hundreds of applicants. Emma had earned this opportunity through her own hard work and determination. "Emma, that's incredible," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," she said with a grin. "And I'm proud of all of us. Look at what we've accomplished." She was right. Looking around the table at my family, I saw 4 people who had each overcome significant challenges and were building meaningful lives. Not perfect lives. Not lives without problems or setbacks, but lives characterized by growth, responsibility, and mutual support, rather than dysfunction and enabling. Tyler raised his water glass in a toast. To Mom, for teaching us that real love sometimes means letting people figure things out for themselves. We all raised our glasses, and as I looked around the table at the faces of the people I loved most in the world, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. We were functioning as a healthy family for the first time in years, each of us contributing to the other's well-being, rather than one person carrying everyone else. 3 weeks later, I started my first job as a registered nurse in the critical care unit at Tampa General Hospital. It was the same hospital where I'd done my clinical rotations, and many of the staff members I'd worked with as a student welcomed me back as a colleague. The work was exactly as challenging and rewarding as I'd hoped it would be. I cared for patients recovering from major surgeries, helped families navigate difficult medical decisions, and used my skills to make a real difference in people's lives during some of their most vulnerable moments. But beyond the professional satisfaction, nursing gave me something I'd been searching for my entire adult life, a sense of purpose that came from my own choices and abilities rather than from other people's needs and crises. On my 6-month anniversary as a nurse, I received a card from Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had been one of my first patients during clinical rotations. She'd written, "Dear Nurse Rebecca, I wanted you to know that you made such a difference during my hospital stay. Your kindness and expertise helped me feel safe during a scary time. Thank you for choosing nursing as your career." I kept that card on my bathroom mirror, where I could see it every morning as I got ready for work. It reminded me that I'd found my calling, that all the difficult decisions and challenging transitions of the past few years had led me to exactly where I was supposed to be. That evening, I came home to find David cooking dinner, while Emma, who was home for summer break, helped Tyler prepare for a presentation he was giving in his psychology class. The scene was so normal, so functional, that it took my breath away. This was what I'd been working toward without really knowing it. Not a perfect family, but a healthy one. Not people who never struggled or made mistakes, but people who took responsibility for their choices and supported each other's growth. As I changed out of my scrubs and joined my family in the kitchen, I thought about the woman who had stood at her kitchen sink 2.5 years ago, overwhelmed by everyone else's problems and feeling like she was disappearing. That woman had made the brave decision to choose herself, to pursue her own dreams, and to stop enabling the people she loved. The result wasn't just that I'd become a nurse, though that was certainly important. The result was that my entire family had learned to function as independent, responsible adults who chose to be together rather than needing to be together. Tyler graduated from his addiction counseling program 18 months later and was hired by the same treatment center where he'd gotten sober. He specialized in working with young adults who were struggling with alcohol and substance abuse, and he was remarkably effective at helping them understand the connection between personal responsibility and recovery. Emma finished her physical therapy degree and moved to Denver, where she worked with a sports medicine clinic helping athletes recover from injuries. She called regularly, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to maintain a relationship with her family. David completed his business program and was promoted to project manager at his construction company. He discovered that he had a talent for organizing complex projects and managing teams, skills that had been dormant during his years of unemployment and depression. And I continued working in critical care nursing, eventually becoming a charge nurse and then a clinical educator, training new nurses and helping them develop the skills and confidence they needed to provide excellent patient care. 5 years. After my first nursing school class, I was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for a new class of nursing students. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of 50 new nurses who were about to begin their careers, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I was standing exactly where you are now, I told them, excited, nervous, and probably wondering if I was really qualified to be responsible for other people's health and well-being. I paused, thinking about how to convey the most important lesson I'd learned. Nursing is obviously about caring for patients and families during difficult times. But what I've discovered is that being an effective nurse requires the same skills that are necessary for any healthy relationship: clear boundaries, honest communication, and the wisdom to know when helping someone means doing things for them, and when it means teaching them to do things for themselves. After the ceremony, a middle-aged woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to thank you for what you said about boundaries," she said. "I'm starting nursing school at 43, and my family thinks I'm crazy for going back to school at my age. Your words reminded me that pursuing my own goals isn't selfish." I thought about myself at 38, standing in Dr. Patterson's office and feeling like it was too late to change my life. "It's never too late to become the person you're meant to be," I told her. "Sometimes it just takes longer to figure out who that person is." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much my definition of success had changed over the past 5 years. Success used to mean keeping everyone else happy and managing their problems efficiently. Now it meant living authentically, pursuing meaningful work, and maintaining relationships based on mutual respect rather than codependence. I thought about the young woman who had received that acceptance letter to nursing school so many years ago and almost thrown it away because she didn't think she deserved to pursue her own dreams. That woman had been brave enough to choose herself, even when it felt selfish and scary. The choice to pursue nursing school had been the beginning of everything. It had led to setting boundaries with my family, which had led to healthier relationships. It had led to discovering my own capabilities and interests, which had led to meaningful work. It had led to becoming someone who helped others grow rather than enabling them to stay stuck. Most importantly, it had led to understanding that loving someone sometimes means letting them struggle, letting them fail, and letting them discover their own strength. At a red light, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled. The woman looking back at me was confident, content, and living a life she'd chosen rather than a life that had been imposed on her by other people's expectations and needs. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Not just to this moment, but to this version of myself. Tomorrow I would go to work and care for patients who needed my expertise and compassion. I would come home to a family that functioned as a team, rather than depending on one person to carry everyone else. I would continue learning and growing and building a life that reflected my values and interests. But tonight, I simply sat in the peaceful silence and appreciated how far I'd come. From the woman who couldn't say no to anyone, to the woman who had learned that the most loving thing you can do sometimes is to let people figure things out for themselves. It had taken me 38 years to learn that lesson, but once I did, everything else had fallen into place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.